Welcome to Your Donut, You Eat It. I'm your host, Sean. You know, you ever paid attention to the stuff we consume, how much music is so integral to it, or how visually appealing something is, or how much more visually appealing it is because it's well produced, or that it has those musical elements that just tie in visually to all of it. So yesterday and today, I finally broke down and started watching Star Wars Visions. Now, as a fan who's a big Star Wars fan, I have been since I was probably like 5 or 6 years old. I'm about to be 46. And Star Wars has always been a big deal. And I've talked about why it is because, you know, my mom, that was one of the things, as much as my mom and I didn't get along for a lot of life, it was one of the things we always bonded on was Star Wars. So much so that I adopted a culture based on Star Wars. I adopted the Mandalorian identity culture because it's based on adoption. It's based on stuff that has happened in my life that makes sense to me. You know, my real father left. I got my dad when I was like 3 or 4 years old. He adopted me. I adopted my kids. So it makes sense to me. But what I noticed today and yesterday was Star Wars Visions. And Visions is a very short, each episode is maybe 5 to 20 minutes long. Okay? It's all different storylines, different things, different types of animation. It's all animated, so there's no live action. Some of it's anime style. Some of it is stop motion style. Some of it is, you know, traditional animation. But visually, it's very appealing. It's something I wasn't expecting. I didn't catch on until midway through this, I think, that the whole Visions was visions of Jedi. And I'm not a fan of Jedi or Sith. And the reason why I'm not is because they're the ones that, in my favorite universe, seem to be the ones that start the wars. You know, yes, the Mandalorians, we started 1 or 2. But the ones that seem to be consistently the people that start wars are Jedi or Sith because of some argument they've had. And there's a reoccurring theme throughout the Vision series about the Force and kyber crystals and Jedi who are emergent Jedi or Jedi who are fully actualized and real Jedi are fully actualized in Sith. One of the most visually appealing ones I saw of the Visions episodes, I should say, was one where it broke down basically a samurai fight. And it reminded me of 47 Ronin, like the original storyline, the original movie. And the battle movements, the fight movements, the style of movement, even the visual style they chose for the anime that they did use was very reminiscent of 47 Ronin. I'm one of those people that have a wide breadth of cultural endeavors that I like. You know, I'm still writing my book. It's about the 100-page mark, so it's about a third of the way through where I want it to be. But as I've been watching and absorbing, trying to get back into making this cultural podcast more relevant and checking out culture, I look at the things that are appealing to me and hope that some of you see these as appealing too. Visions was that type of thing. You know, one of the stop motion things that they had was the last episode of season 2, and I actually kind of liked the story. It's a little kiddish, but I like the storyline. Visually, all of these episodes are very appealing. Storyline, maybe not so much in some of them. But they're enough to muscle through and to see what they are. And they add to the overall storyline of stories of the Star Wars universe. The thing that I got most out of it, though, was that they were just put out for sheer enjoyment. This was something you could put a kid in front of, and they wouldn't think too hard about it, and you wouldn't have to think too hard about it. And there isn't a lot of I would say there's no woke stuff that's penetrated in this particular series. There are males and females of all types. I don't see any that were gay or straight or nothing. There was no sexual connotations with any of this stuff that I could feel or see while observing, watching the series, which is rare nowadays in any series. But to get back to what I was saying, visually, if you're a fan of animation, which I am, a 46-year-old that likes cartoons, imagine that. It's one of the things I've always enjoyed, is comic book style art and anime. And to watch these stories unfold, and to see these different directors and these different storylines interface and do things, these are entirely separate. None of them are based on each other. They're individual, self-contained stories that would make a great comic book because they're only just the one storyline. That in itself is something to be admired nowadays. Enough series and culture that we get into are episodic, meaning that the episode is connected to another piece. You have to know something about the characters before you just get involved in the storyline. Having self-contained stories is kind of nice for someone who's just looking for something to pass the time. That's what I was doing. And watching these little cartoons, these little animes, and realizing how much time and effort were put into them gives me hope that there's still some people trying to create culture, trying to create something, be creative, without trying to underline and underpin them with some sort of idealism that needs to be inherent to the storyline. It resonates with me because I'm not doing that in my book. The book I'm trying to write, maybe there's some of that. I'm full disclosure, I don't see it. It's not intentional. Male characters are there. Female characters are there. There are two really strong female characters. A lot of strong male characters. Alpha types. And it's all based on the conspiracy stuff that we hear all the time. If you haven't lived through the last 5 years and have caught onto conspiracies that actually came true, you would think, wow, I just took some of those conspiracies and decided to integrate them into the storyline that I did. It is a book about angels and demons. I wouldn't call it a Christian book because I wanted a counter to Spawn. I'm a huge fan of Spawn. Always have been, always will be. But I wanted an angelic counter. Not so much in that, Spawn was supposed to be general of Hell's army. My angels aren't the general of heavenly armies. No, this is more about balance. And I hope when it's done, the audience likes it. And then it succeeds. Either way, I still accomplished a goal I didn't know I had. But to get back to culture in general, I'm tired of seeing the same regurgitated stuff, and I didn't get that from Visions. Yeah, there's an underlying theme of Jedi and kyber crystals, and I'm sure that plays out somewhere else in some other storyline that someone else is planning. I mean, if you watched Rogue One, kyber crystals are a big deal. If you know anything about the Death Star or lightsabers, kyber crystals are a big deal. But to see these just be placed in little pieces here and there, while other stories are about, one of them is about a teenage girl who is embarrassed of her mom, and yet still wins a race and gets to go before Wedge Antilles. That's kind of cool. To see that they're still keeping some of the older canon guys like Wedge Antilles alive and around does an old man's heart good. I'm one of those guys, one of those fans. I know who Wedge Antilles is. What I really would have loved to have seen at some point is and maybe this inspired visions, is there's a YouTube short that's been going around for years. It's an anime flashback or an anime film on a TIE fighter battle. And it's very well done. There is no real dialogue. If there is, it's kind of subtitled. But the animation was amazing, and it shows the other side of the film, the other side of the coin. These TIE fighter pilots going into battle, what they had to do to get there, what they were like in a real dogfight. That type of thing is interesting to me. They're one of the reasons why I've always liked Star Wars over Star Trek, is Star Trek always seemed too sanitized, too clean, too unrealistic. Life is never clean and pretty. It's never 100% beautiful. There's always some sort of mess up. There's something that's a little bit different. We live in a gritty, dirty society. Walk out on our streets. You see what I'm talking about. But in Star Trek, you'd always see these pristine, beautiful places up until DS9, where they actually talk about some of the things that are supposed to happen in the future Earth. That was gritty and dirty. But Star Wars has always had that. Look at the cantinas on Tatooine. If you watch the Mandalorian series or the Fett series, you see what I'm talking about. If you could get into Andor, which I couldn't, you're supposedly be able to see more of that grit, more of that dirt, more of the stuff you could see. The more they expand that universe, the more you see it. That makes sense to me. If there are millions upon billions of star systems and millions upon billions of alien races out there because of that, wouldn't they have that grit? It makes sense to me more so than being clean and sanitized and perfect and pristine. Everything with its place and its order. But nature has its own place and order. And nature tends to, at least what I've seen, tends to be organized chaos. Things happen because they're put into play. Maybe it's by God's intent plan. Maybe it's just because of the nature of how these things interact. Maybe it's both. But it's interesting to see how that reflects in culture and how people sanitize or how they make it so clean and pure. And what really stuck out with me with this cultural endeavor was how much the music in the background, and it always matters to me, and I think it always matters to people, they just don't realize it, make that piece of culture, that piece of whatever they're doing, that much better. Like, share, subscribe, be great.